This is probably one of the most hated cameras when it was finally released back in 2011. I had been eyeing this camera for quite some time for a couple of reasons, and this is the first Nikon camera that has finally been featured on this channel. I'm quite picky when it comes to choosing old pocketable-ish cameras, and this is certainly one of the best, if not the best, small Nikon cameras out there. That is why I decided to give it a try. This is the Nikon One V1, Nikon's first mirrorless camera ever. The V1, alongside the J1, introduced Nikon's CX format 1-inch sensor, a new system designed to compete with other mirrorless cameras like Sony Max and Micro Four Thirds. Nikon was quite ambitious with the Nikon One project. The tagline, "I am changing everything," clearly suggests that. At the time of its release, it seemed like they decided to be easy and fun to shoot. I don't think they were really targeting professional photographers, so no wonder this camera and the system got a lot of hate at the time, most probably from professionals and serious enthusiasts. If you think of this camera as an EDC, everyday carry, it makes perfect sense. They wanted to make photography easy and enjoyable, making it part of our everyday lives. The Nikon One system designers admitted themselves that it was intended to eliminate the complicated process of taking photos. The camera technology on smartphones back in 2011 wasn't giving much, so I think Nikon One's target market did make sense. Let's start talking about what people would most likely consider downsides, but I personally like to view them from the other side. So the first one is the CX sensor size. It is a small 1-inch type, 13.2 by 8.8 millimeters. That means you get a 2.7 times crop factor compared to standard full-frame cameras. So my 10mm lens here would be equivalent to 27mm on full-frame cameras. A small sensor also means deeper depth of field, which makes it more difficult to get bokeh with this camera. f2.8 on this lens would act like roughly f7.6 on full-frame cameras. If you are a bokeh hunter, obviously this is not for you. But for an everyday carry camera, this is just perfect. With this camera, you get a much deeper focus area, which means your background is more likely to be in focus. If you like blurred backgrounds, I think the Nikon One Nikkor 32mm f1.2 will be your choice. But for me personally, I'm a pancake shooter, so 10mm is the way to go. This Nikon One V1 only has 10 megapixels. Is that enough? Well, 10 megapixels is plenty. You can print up to 32.8 by 21.9 centimeters to get the best details at 300 ppi. Assuming this is your daily camera, I think most people would rarely print photos. 10 megapixels is still versatile while saving you plenty of storage. You get around 3 to 6 megabytes per file for the JPEGs and around 10 megabytes per file for the RAW file, compared to 36 megapixels from the Pentax K1, where you get 12 to 25 megabytes per JPEG file and 40 to 60 megabytes per RAW file. Bigger megapixels come with storage issues. If you shoot casually on an everyday basis, just documenting your life, 10 megapixel is more than enough and will save you tons. Working on 40 to 60 megabytes RAW files would require a a decent computer. Even if I finally get the courage to throw my money on a Leica M camera, the 10 megapixels Leica M8 will be my first choice. If you've been following this channel, you know I love my 10 megapixels Canon G12. My Fujifilm X-Q1 is 12 megapixels and I love them. You can shoot as frequently as you want without worrying about running out of storage. I mean, it is annoying when you haven't really shot much, but suddenly you've occupied 200 gigabytes on your SSD. The Nikon one is practically a dead system. You only have about 13 lens options in total. Since they are limited on the market, they might cost you a bit more. If you are planning to get one of these Nikon 1 V1s, it's best to get it bundled with lens. Yes, of course, you can adapt your manual lenses like I do here. I adapted a CCTV lens to my Nikon 1 V1, but you won't get the benefit of the fast autofocus that Nikon 1 system has, which I'll talk about more later in the video. Any of the native Nikon 1 lenses will do. For me, this 10mm is a must. Honestly, I would not consider getting this camera at all if the system didn't have a pancake lens. So I decided that if I ever tried the Nikon 1 V1, it had to be with this 10mm lens. Sadly, the supply is limited here in my country. This is the only one I could find online, which is really annoying. White on black really ruins my plan to be completely invisible with this camera. If you are a manual shooter, shooting with this camera will not be comfortable. You can change your shutter speed with this toggle here and your f-stops with this wheel, but changing your ISO requires you to dive deep into the menu, which is annoying. You do not have the standard PSAM here, so changing between aperture priority, shutter speed priority, or manual would require going deep into the menu. I think this is my only major complaint about the camera, but so far I've been compromising and eventually choosing to shoot more on program mode and putting ISO on auto. If it's daytime with sufficient light, I set ISO to A400 auto. If it's nighttime or indoors with minimal light, A3200 auto. If it's overcast or indoors with sufficient light, then A800 auto. But sometimes I set ISO manually. Most of the time I shoot in program mode, and I think you should too with this particular camera. I'll tell you why later in the video. I think it's more fair to say that Nikon never targeted professional photographers with this camera. It was meant to be easy to use. We have to appreciate why they made weird design choices with the dials here. Build quality wise, this Nikon 1 V1 indeed feels premium. It reminds me of the Fujifilm X70. This Nikon 1 V1 was marketed as the flagship model of the Nikon 1 series. The top plate and front cover are definitely magnesium alloy, and the back cover is premium plastic. Again, these sturdy buttons remind me of the Fujifilm X70. At the top, you only have the power button, shutter button, and video recording button. Here you have a non-standard hot shoe. Beware of the missing port cover. You can add an adapter for the hot shoe, but you'll have to pay extra. On the side, you have an external microphone, mini HDMI, and micro USB port. At the back, you have a 3-inch screen with 921K dots, which is surprisingly good in my opinion. Mine suffers a bit of vignetting, which is fine by me. You have an F button to choose between electronic and mechanical shutter. And by the way, I love the sound of the mechanical shutter of this camera. It's not as loud as the Lumix GX1, nor as silent as the leaf shutter of the Fujifilm X70. It's just perfect. You have this toggle to change your shutter speed or aperture or both, depending on what mode you are using. This is the non-standard mode that everyone was mad about. Instead of PSAM, you get video, stills, smart photo selector, and motion snapshot. I bet 90% of people who own this camera only use the stills and video modes. And here you have your standard D-pad buttons, autofocus or auto exposure lock, exposure compensation, focus mode selector, and self-timer. The only dial I'm not a fan of is this roller. It seems sturdy, but it is prone to failing. But so far it works well. You also have the display button, playback, menu, and delete buttons. And yes, you get an electronic viewfinder here with a diopter adjustment and 100% coverage on the viewfinder here. You can turn the screen off and only use the viewfinder by hitting the display button. The problem is, it seems the viewfinder only turns on based on the sensor. I can't find a way to make it always on unless you trick the camera by covering the sensor with tape or something. The last firmware for this camera is version 1.4. If you have the camera, make sure to check your firmware and update it. Make sure your battery is fully charged before updating, so the camera doesn't shut off during the process. You don't want to run into trouble with that. People do complain about the lagging of the viewfinder sensor, which is true and can be annoying, especially if you want the camera to respond quickly so you don't miss the moment. Nevertheless, it's very nice to have a viewfinder here. And the viewfinder is one of the main reasons why I want this camera. For the same price range of an old cameras, I don't think you'll find another one with a viewfinder. The autofocus is very fast and accurate. Believe me, with this camera, you have one of the fastest autofocus systems in a compact camera. Many people recognize this when it was first released. That's why getting this camera with its native lenses is a must. Sure, you can adapt manual lenses to it, but you won't get the benefit of its fast and accurate autofocus. Nikon also notes that the Nikon One system works best with native lenses. They also recommend using P or program mode to get the best from the autofocus system. So I decided to use the camera as intended. I've been shooting in program mode with this camera. I was blown away by the image quality of this camera. The small 1-inch sensor and only 10 megapixels. I'm not exaggerating, but the last time I experienced this level of image quality in a compact camera was with the Fujifilm X70, but this feels like a slightly more generic version of it. My setup here cost me around $170, and that's 5 times cheaper than the Fujifilm X70. You can get the Nikon One V1 body only today for around $90 to $125 on the market, and the kit lens around the same price, so roughly $200 to $250 is still a good deal, I think. The image quality is superb. I'm not a fan of vivid colors on cameras, but I think I can appreciate the vivid picture style on this one. I believe this camera has a AA or anti-aliasing filter, which can reduce sharpness, but surprisingly, the sharpness is quite decent. Obviously, the X70 is better and sharper, but it really reminds me that 10 megapixels is really enough. Obviously, you won't use this camera to do professional work in this age of camera technology, but for travel and daily photography, image quality wise, the camera is perfect for me. I also love the level of JPEG customization this camera has. I haven't experimented much, but if you've been following this channel, you know that I like to experiment with JPEG recipes on non-Fujifilm cameras. I've done it on Lumix, I've done it on Canon and Olympus, and I want to try it on Nikon. You have the white balance shift, or what Nikon calls fine-tuning. In the picture control menu, you have standard, neutral, vivid, monochrome, portrait, and landscape. And you can adjust settings within each: sharpening, contrast, brightness, saturation, and hue. Even in monochrome, you have a bunch of filters combination to experiment with. Obviously, it's not for everyone, but if you like doing weird experiments like me, you'll definitely love this camera. And the good news is, you also have all those customizations options in movie mode. I once tried to emulate film cinema on the Lumix GX1, and this camera will be up next for that experiment. So what do you think? I guess I'll see you guys in the next video. Au revoir.